Hello, I am Elizabeth McConnell. I'm a colon and rectal surgeon and fellow of the American College of Surgeons, as well as a fellow of the American Society of Colon and Rectal Surgeons. And I'm here today to present to you the final recommendations for colon and rectal cancer screening. The 2021 United States Preventive Task Force Services had just come out, and I was asked to give this presentation. So as you can see, the Arizona Alliance of Community Health Care Centers had asked that I present this talk, which is basically an update from the original recommendations that were done in 2002, 2008, and 2016. So I'm going to begin with a kind of a summary of what my goals are to provide information on, moving on then to the introductions and methods and results. So essentially, the purpose of the webinar is actually to discuss the key prevention recommendations of the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force around colon cancer prevention and projected changes to those recommendations. So the updates that were to be explained were lifestyle, diet, exercise recommendations for prevention, trends in population health data associated with colon cancer, especially for underserved populations in communities of color. By the end of the presentation, I think we'll be able to identify key colon cancer prevention recommendations and projected changes to those recommendations, identify additional prevention strategies such as diet and exercise, and evaluate colon cancer trends in the United States, especially in the underserved populations. So, the recommendations came about with a review of data, reviewing recommended screening approaches, identifying prevention strategies, and then looking at cancer trends in young, underserved, and seeing whether there was any sex-based differences. The rationale. The present screening, as was listed in 2016's review, stated that everyone needed a colonoscopy every 10 years, a flexible sigmoidoscopy every 5 years, or a sigmoidoscopy every 10 years with annual fecal immunochemical staining or testing, or a computed tomographic colonography every 5 years, or a highly sensitive annual guaiac-based fecal occult blood test, or a multi-targeted stool DNA test, either annually or every 3 years. The importance for screening are the fact that colon cancer, is the second leading cause of death in the United States. The mortality rates have actually declined to 51% from 1975 to 2016. 53,000 people died of colon cancer in 2020. Colon cancer is most frequently diagnosed between the ages of 65 and 74, with a mean age at death of 73, which begs the question of when do you stop the screening colonoscopies. About 1/3 of eligible adults in the United States have never been screened for colon and rectal cancer. So the reason why the screening recommendations came out was because no person wants to do one specific test. Some people don't like doing analysis of their own stool. Some people don't like getting a colonoscope without any sedation. And some people don't like getting x-rays. So the purpose of coming up with 6 different recommendations for testing was to appeal to the maximum number of people. And if you maximize the total number of persons who are screened, then you have the largest effect on reducing colon cancer deaths. So the key questions that were to be asked and answered with the 2021 recommendations were, how do the benefits, burdens, and harms of screening average risk asymptomatic adults for colon cancer vary by screening modality, screening interval, age to begin screening, and age to end screening? Which screening strategies are efficient in terms of additional number of colonoscopies per life year gain? And do the efficient strategies vary by sex and race? Do the answers to the key questions 1 and 2 change when efficacy is measured as additional number of colonoscopies per quality adjusted life year gained as the additional number of colonoscopies per colorectal cancer death averted? And do the answers to key questions 1 and 2 change according to assumptions about underlying risk of colon cancer? The overview of this is simply that these were 3 independently developed microsimulation models of colon cancer, and each model consisted of a demography component, a natural history component, and a screening component. The changes basically for 2021 are there was an increased population risk identified, and then analysis by sex and race did not seem to pan out. If you look at the colon cancer incidence by race among 20 to 44-year-olds, there's definitely an increase. So the age recommendation is now for 45 years of age. As far as race is concerned, it's primarily an access of care issue. The primary driver of difference in colorectal cancer incidence and mortality by race is access to screening and subsequent care rather than any biologic difference in natural history. Black-white differences in colorectal cancer incidence began only after the dissemination of screening. There is strong evidence that blacks are less likely to be screened for colon cancer than whites, and that there is self-limited evidence for black-white differences in findings of screening, including detection of adenomas, advanced adenomas, and cancer. And finally, sex. There was no difference with respect to sex in all 3 studies. The SIM-CRC, the CRC SPIN, and the MISCAN all had no difference. There were some overlapping confidence intervals. Essentially, all models assumed the same, no difference. So now we're outside the rationale. Now we move to diet and exercise. It's not really part of the U.S. Task Force recommendations, but we do know that benefits of diet, so being overweight or obese, increases the risk of several cancers, including colorectal cancer. Also, there was a wonderful study that was done by the American College of Surgeons where patients with stage 3 cancer who had increased fiber and decreased caloric intake resulted in a 9% absolute reduction in the risk of death at 5 years. And then finally, 10 minutes of vigorous or 20 minutes of moderate exercise daily decreases the risk of colon cancer. So the scope and purpose of the 2021 update was basically to update the prior analysis of how the benefits, burdens, and harms of colon cancer screening might vary by screening modality, screening interval, age to begin screening, and age to end screening. And essentially, you're going to see that screening modalities really haven't changed, but the screening interval did. The screening interval is now 45 to 75. Beginning at age 45, ending at age 75. Incorporating recent evidence and increased rates of colorectal cancer among adults decreased the age to 45, but there was no difference between sex and race. Cancer trends, basically the annual number of cancer deaths has been going down, but in underserved populations, particularly Black communities, the cancer death rate is 18 per 100,000 versus Indian or Native Americans, Pacific Islanders, Hispanics, which is 10 in 100,000. White differences have to do with access to care and are 13 per 100,000. So the methods that were used to determine the new standards, the tests in 2016 were colonoscopy, flexible sigmoidoscopy, CT colonography, guaiac, fecal occult blood test, fecal immunochemical testing, stool DNA test, and the methylated sept DNA test. Those 7 tests were decreased to 6 tests. And in fact, the goal was to decrease the morbidity, mortality, the harms, and the test performance, and then optimize the starting and stopping age. The reason that the methylated sept DNA was disregarded was because it had a sensitivity to detect colon cancer of only, at best, 50%. So the new tests are actually now 6 tests. Didn't even include the serologic DNA test. But you can see very clearly that although every one of these tests has a specificity of over 87%, the actual sensitivity for colorectal cancer diagnosis is in a range of 68 to 95%. And more importantly, the only test that really detects colon cancer throughout the entire colon prior to it turning into cancer is the colonoscopy. So the results. The goal in 2021 is the age is changed from 45 to 75, and you must screen for colorectal cancer as the benefits outweigh the risks. Age 76 to 85, it really depends on the patient's overall health, the personal circumstances, and to talk to the clinician about risks. Certainly, if somebody reaches this age and has had no studies done, colonoscopy can be used, but it is a higher risk. So you can see from the screening, the 3 models that were done, that the cancer deaths rate really do dramatically drop with screening. And simply put, the screenings could be just a stool-based FIT test every year, a DNA FIT test every 3 years, or a CT colonography or a flexible SIG every 5 years, or a colonoscopy every 10 years, just for simple screening. Simple discussion. Starting at age 45 was generally predicted to result in more life years gained and quality-adjusted life years gained, fewer colorectal cancer cases and deaths than similar strategies with screening starting at age 50 or age 55, alibi with higher burden of both colonoscopy and non-colonoscopy testing and a slightly higher risk of complications. So at this point, I open up the discussion, and if you have any questions or would like to go back to any of the slides, I can do that at this point. Otherwise, thank you for tuning in, and make your anus great again. I think that's what it says right there.